with the Struthers Wildcats as they look to take that next step this season under Coach Bayek. Ty, I mean, we talked about Struthers and Girard and Hubbard, the three teams that we expect to be huddling around that top and teams that we expect to make a big run this year and a big jump. What can you say about the Wildcats?
Well, the Wildcats last year, they finished with a record of 2-6, including the playoffs. Scored 116 points. Against them, they allowed 197. Couple of players that are going to be coming back. A couple of defensive players is Gino Calabret, linebacker who was second team NE8 last year, and then sophomore Anthony Carter, defensive back, first team NE8 last year as a freshman, which is pretty impressive, I might say, Anthony. But this is just goes to show how young this Struthers team actually is. And one of the areas that they want to improve on, obviously, they need to be able to score more points. And the differential between points scored and points against was a little staggering last year. But, I mean, it was just turnovers and unfortunate situations, just similar to Hubbard, as Anthony Romo highlighted. It was turnovers and unfortunate situations, a lot of defensive scores by other teams, too, on those turnovers that really bolstered those stats. But
Ty, those are really tough to come back from. When you give what I call NOTs, non-offensive touchdowns. And it felt like every time Struthers was getting ready to compete or getting ready to be there in a game, they'd give up a pick six or a fumble recovery for a touchdown. And those are just, they're backbreakers. And sometimes there is luck. Sometimes you fumble the ball, someone gets it in a open space and breaks one tackle, and all of a sudden it's a touchdown. Or sometimes ball gets tipped and it's in a bad spot, and all of a sudden it gets picked off from back for a touchdown. So sometimes they're bad luck and bad breaks, but those non-offensive touchdowns can really break your back.
And you could also chalk that up, too, to the lack of practice times that they had, too, and the lack of preparedness maybe for each opponent. We know opponents were coming in and out each week. We know practice schedules were wonky. Sometimes you're stopping for 2 weeks, and then you're starting again. It's really hard, too, to teach taking care of the ball, too. Yeah. Throw in the fact that we had how many rain games and how many games where there was moisture on the field, too.
You could sit back and say, well, every team dealt with that, but it affects some teams more than others. That's just reality.
Yeah, every team got dealt a different hand.
Struthers was such a young team last year. It probably affected them a lot more than maybe a senior-led team.
Well, yeah, especially, too, I mean, I just told you, Anthony Carter, freshman last year, defensive back that was a first-team NE8. I mean, imagine that, though. This is a team full of a lot of young freshmen and sophomores. This is your first year in high school, maybe second year in high school sports varsity level. You're throwing COVID now, where your practice schedule's all out of wonk. And now you're throwing this weird schedule where you have to prepare for a different opponent. A lot of these kids had to train at home during the summer too. So, I mean, it's very difficult too, especially for a team that's young, that's not even gotten to meet their coach or train under the coach and know what the coach kind of likes them to work on and has to kind of figure it out all on their own. It's tough. I do look for Struthers now that they had a year now. A lot of these younger players now had a year under the head coaching now. Get to learn the system a little bit more and get to be more proficient in the system, I think.
You know what else is going to help them? That community is going to be able to go support them. I mean, no one takes – well, I'm not going to say no one. Not a lot of teams take their football as seriously as Struthers. I mean, we had Coach Bayek on a couple of weeks ago, and he talked about how when they were having practice, there would be people lined up trying to get into their practice just to see this team for the first time. Struthers is very excited about their football, and for the first time for some of these kids, like Anthony Carter, first time, he's going to be able to hear people go nuts when he breaks a big run.
Yeah, exactly. And also, guys don't really realize how much of a close-knit community Struthers is, and you highlight that. And I'm glad you do highlight that, Anthony, because you notice that too a lot from the parents of Struthers. I mean, they go out and they support these kids' hearts, and then friends of families support their kids' hearts. It's a very close-knit community, and it's not just football. It's all sports that they go hard for. You saw it in basketball for both teams. You see it in volleyball, and you see it in baseball as well. I mean, this is a team that loves their sports, a community that loves their sports and loves their kids and supporting their kids.
Ooh, and one of the communities that we love being a part of so much at Y is like when you go to a game at Struthers, especially one of the basketball games in that field house.
Oh yeah, that's the legendary field house.
But their football fans are back, And we know that they're so excited. So they should have a lot of energy from the crowd this year that they're able to feed off of.
And looking at their schedule this year, again, the 3 non-conference games, they start out August 20th at St. Thomas Aquinas. Then they go August 27th.
Yeah, I think we have to update that because I think we've been told that St. Thomas Aquinas is one of the teams that is either going to play 8-on-8 or not have a football season. We've seen a couple of teams struggle with that. So I don't know if it's official yet or not, but
it may not be official. So that first week might be pending.
It might be up in the air a little bit.
Yeah, this is the latest schedules we have up to date, but thanks for getting that update on there. So we'll see on that August 20th game. The 27th, though, Crestwood is coming to Struthers at home. September 3rd, another Streetsboro game. So Streetsboro visiting this area from my backyard to yours a couple of times.
They're trying to pick up the NE8 a little bit.
Yeah, and then they start on their conference schedule with September 10th being home versus South Range, 17th home versus Hubbard, 24th at Lakeview, October 1st at Jefferson, October 8th versus Niles, 15th at Girard, 22nd at Poland.
You open the NE8 season with South Range, and then you close the NE8 season with Poland.
So you have a big game to look forward to at the beginning and at the end.
Then a lot of games that you're going to have a lot of pressure to win in between.
Yeah. And you know what? Struthers' schedule is probably one of the most balanced that I'm looking at. It's not very front-loaded or back-loaded. It's pretty much throughout the year, there's a tough opponent mixed in, a really tough opponent mixed in about every other week. Whereas other teams, it seems like they have like 4 straight tough opponents, and then maybe the schedule lightens up a little bit before it gets a little tough again. But no, like Struthers it looks consistently, it's just has toughness throughout the schedule all the way through.
Yeah, and to play that schedule and to go through it, and we talked about Crestwood, not Crestview. Don't get Crestwood. I've made that mistake plenty of times. Crestwood, that's a strong football program, and then all of a sudden you're playing Streetsboro, who we've already talked about. That's a game you want to get healthy out of because they're a team that plays very physical.
But I mean,
how open the NE8 season against South Range? So you go through a tough non-conference, and then boom, here comes the Raiders.
I mean, look at these. But those are 4 straight games at home too: Crestwood, Streetsboro, South Range, Hubbard. Like bam, 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 and those are 4 straight home games. 4 out of the first 5 games are home for Struthers, which is kind of odd because they have a front-loaded schedule, at least being at home.
For Struthers to take that jump, they have to come out of that with at least a winning record.
You have to think
then if you don't, you have to make up room almost exclusively on the road. That's asking a lot of your team.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a couple of games where an upset alert might be plausible for Struthers being on the road. At Lakeview, at Girard, I think those will be close games. At Poland can even be a close game if Struthers comes to play too. That young team can get hyped up being in that Poland crowd because we know how loud that Poland crowd can get too, especially if you're an opposing team. But that'll be a fun game to watch though too. But I agree with you, Anthony. That 4-week stretch, you got to come out winners, but it's going to be tough. Crestwood, Streetsboro, South Range, Hubbard. You got to at least be 2-2 out of that to have. Yeah,
very doable and something that Struthers has to try to aim for.
Yeah, if you could go 2-2 out of that, if you could survive that 4-game stretch, albeit it's at home too, so you do have the home crowd behind you, and we know how much the Struthers faithful will help out being behind the Wildcats. But
it's
you got to.
Even though Struthers is an underdog in some of those games, it's really hard to picture that program being an underdog because they're so proud. They're so historically great. They had one down year, and all of a sudden we're talking like, oh, they might be an underdog. They might be an underdog. And I'm thinking like, man, I'm still looking at Struthers like that's going to be a really tough game, and it will be. And I think we have to remember how proud that Struthers program is a little bit, and not take that for granted just because they had a year where they went 2-6 in a COVID year where they were very young.
You look at that September 10th game, too, where South Range comes into town, and I'll tell you what, Coach Yeagley will tell you.
You want to make a statement, open the NE8 season beating South Range at home.
Yeah, that would be huge. That would be huge. And Coach Yeagley will tell you as much as the next guy too. I mean, going into and playing in Struthers is not an easy crowd to play in front of if you're the away team, because that team, I mean, they get loud. They get loud for the Wildcats, and that stadium can get rocking. And Struthers feels like it's vibrating on a Friday night too with some of these games. So yeah, you got to really play up when you go home to play in Struthers. It's going to be a tough game though, and they got a tough schedule ahead of them, but it's part of what's going to make them better too, and it's part of helping them to take that next step.
They have Anthony Carter. They lose Aiden Hall, who was one of the more electric players on their offense last year. So they have, one guy that did a lot of damage, first team coming back, and another one that they have to kind of try to find ways to replace in Aiden Hall. So very interesting season ahead for the Struthers Wildcats.